latest podcast, the Heidelminicast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Did the Roman Catholic Church move the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday?
If the Heidelcast helps you, will you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Get the app.
The Heidelcast.
We've got a text message, which, even though it's not in the coffer, not an email, I have nevertheless printed it out. And it says, it's a little bit long, but it's interesting and important, from Sean. I thought I saw Sean. Yes, there it is. It's S-H-A-U-N, Sean. Oh, I heard Tom and Ray the other day talking about, maybe it was a caller who said that he had a friend who spelled Tom T-A-U-G-H-M. I thought that was great. Tom. Anyway. All right, this is from Sean. Good day to you, Dr. Clark. Well, good day to you, sir. From Montana. You often ring the cowbell. I do. For those who submit good questions or when you are recommending a good resource. So that, with that in mind, I believe there needs to be a massive cowbell for you and the whole HRA team. Well, thank you very much on behalf of the team for all that you do. Your work is truly phenomenal. Well, their work is. Mine's mostly mediocre. But they do some pretty good work and has not only had a huge impact in my life, but in the lives of many around the world. So thank you for all that you do. Well, thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate that. My question regards the Sabbath and Seventh-day Adventism. Someone I dearly love is becoming convinced that the Sabbath is Saturday and that the Roman Catholic Church was responsible for changing it to Sunday. But as a good Heidelcast listener, I have learned to question the premise. Well done, Sean. And thus I did. His claim that the Roman Catholic Church changed the Sabbath to Sunday simply isn't true. Well, that's right. You're right, Sean. Very, very right. And there's plenty of evidence in Scripture and early church history that the church was meeting on the first day, the Lord's Day. My problem, however, is that there is no explicit verse in the New Testament to suggest a change from Saturday to Sunday. And anytime I try to talk with my friend about this issue, he brings this up and says, surely, if it changed, the New Testament would say it had. How could I address this issue with my friend or the Seventh-day Adventist from my area with a biblical perspective? What are the stronger biblical texts or frameworks to address this issue? Thanks again for all that you do. Well, let me go through some of the stuff, Sean, that you've already gone through, because not everybody's done the work that you've done. But to answer your question directly, but first off, we're talking about an inference here. It's the same kind of question, I guess, as the movement from circumcision to baptism. There are a lot of things that the Bible doesn't say explicitly, that it says implicitly, and the church has drawn these inferences. And the movement from infant circumcision to infant baptism is one of those. And it rests on, for example, Colossians 2, 11 and 12, where in Paul's mind, those two things are inextricably linked. They both witness to death. Circumcision points forward to Christ's death, and baptism looks backward to Christ's death. And so from that and other places, the church inferred that the sign of initiation into the visible covenant community was no longer circumcision, but baptism. Now, there is some explicit witness to, the end of circumcision as a type and a shadow, but still, there's a lot of inferring going on. And so it is, too. Here, in this case, on the Sabbath, there's a lot of inferring. The Sabbath pattern is established in creation, and it's true that under the types and shadows, the Sabbath was on the last day of the week. But there's very good evidence that on the basis of Jesus' resurrection, and this is what I think the Adventists, whether they be, or the Seventh-day people better, so this would be true for Seventh-day Baptists, which emerged in the Anabaptist movement, and the Seventh-day Adventist, which picked up those ideas in the 19th century, they all said, well, no, the Saturday Sabbath hasn't changed because they all undervalued the centrality of the resurrection. to borrow a phrase from a title that Richard Gaffin used in 1974. The resurrection changes everything, right? And I think that's just something that Orthodox Christians have always understood, that the early church understood. As you say, the evidence is very clear from the New Testament. If you accept the premise that the resurrection is sufficient to change everything. Well, why is the resurrection sufficient to change everything? Because from it, Paul infers a whole other construct, and that is the construct of the new creation. The resurrection is the beginning of the new creation. And he says that in, for example, 2 Corinthians 5. We should take a look at Colossians 1:15 and following. Colossians 1:15 and following, this is from the English Standard Version. He, it's Christ, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, if you just stop there, you'd think, well, maybe the Arians had a point. Well, you'd be missing Paul's point. As I say, heretics are typically really bad exegetes, bad explainers of Scripture. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. There's the value of my great breakthrough. Keep reading. Verse 17, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning of the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So when he talks about firstborn from the dead, that is an allusion to the resurrection. And he connects resurrection there with creation. So for Paul, the resurrection is the beginning of a new creation. It's the beginning, in principle, of the new heavens and the new earth. It is a sort of inbreaking into redemptive history of the new heavens and the new earth. And as I say, the Seventh-day Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists just miss that. They miss that fundamental structure of the New Testament. So if you're asking for categories and for sort of broader arguments, that's where I would go. Now, just to rehearse the evidence that Sean knows, but you listener may not know, Matthew 28:1 uses this interesting expression. First of the Sabbaths is what it says in Greek, which is an idiomatic Hebraic way of talking about the first day of the week. And so that's when they found Jesus, right? He was alive. He'd been raised on the first day of the week. And you see that same expression in Acts 20, verse 7, miaton, sabbaton, again, a Jewish idiom. And you see similar expressions elsewhere in Scripture, 1 Corinthians 16:2, and then an allusion almost certainly to Sunday, at least it was understood that way by the ancient church, in Revelation 1:10. The Lord's Day is understood by the ancient church, and properly so, as Sunday. Now, as to the claim that the Roman Catholic Church changed it, well, this is an argument, an Adventist argument, that the Council of Nicaea changed the Saturday Sabbath to Sunday, which could possibly be true, but it isn't. How do I know that? Well, because I've read the history of the Council of Nicaea, and you can read the councils, and that just never happened. So this is one of these things where when people don't know any history, right, they make appeals to things that they've heard or that somebody's told them or whatever, or they appeal to events that were far away, long ago, and obscure, and trust that nobody will look them up. Well, some of us have, and there just isn't any evidence for that claim. So, in fact, there's lots of counter evidence, and I survey that evidence in a book that you might know about, Recovering the Reformed Confession, and I go through this on pages 304 to 307. So you might take a look at that. As I say, Revelation 1:10, I mentioned that. R.J. Bauckham, this is from page 305, says that before the end of the apostolic period, the early Christian practice was to meet on Sunday morning and evening. He takes Revelation 1:10 as a temporal referent that John, quote, receives his visions on the day when the churches meet for corporate worship, and on the same day his prophecy will be read aloud, 1:3, right, Revelation 1:3, in the church meeting, close quote. He argues that the predominant theme of the revelation is Christ's lordship and concludes that as the visions were read in the churches, Christians were to understand that despite their current circumstances, the Christ who had conquered and revealed himself to John was laying claim to the first day of the week over against the imperial cult and the monthly emperor's day. Close quote. The Didache, which is a very early Christian moral instruction and church order, dated probably around AD 110, used the expression Lord's Day, right? That's the early interpretation of Revelation 1:10. The significance is disputed, but it seems relatively clear to me, and it has seemed clear to the rest of the church most of the time. According to C.W. Dugmore, this expression was used in the same way in some of the early Christian apocryphal writings. Now, quoting here, the Lord's Day, then, very early achieved a position among Christians equal to that of the Sabbath among the Jews. Close quote. Though there were Saturday Sabbatarians in the early church, the general practice of the Orthodox in the post-apostolic period seems to have been to keep a Sunday Sabbath, and their practice was in contrast with at least three groups who denied the Sunday Sabbath in favor of a seventh-day Sabbath, and those were the Ebionites, Apollinarians, and the Manichaeans. Well, the Apollinarians and the Manichaeans were heretics. In fact, so were the Ebionites. The Ebionites are among the earliest heretics, and the Ebionites were Judaizers. They wanted to go backward in redemptive history. Well, you can check out more of that in Recovering the Reformed Confession. So there's lots of evidence to the contrary to the Saturday Sabbatarian argument. One of the strongest pieces of evidence that I think of now is the Quarto Decumen controversy of the first quarter of the second century. It was a debate between those who said that, on the one side, we ought to observe what they called Pascha, P-A-S-C-H-A, Pascha. We call it Easter now, but it was the Christian Pascha, the Christian Passover. They said that we ought to observe that on the 14th Nisan, wherever that fell, whatever day of the week. And they were known as Quarto Decumens, right? That's 14. So 14th Nisan. And the others said, no, we ought to observe Pascha on the nearest Sunday. And it was that group that won that fight. But the argument was over whether Sunday or 14th Nisan. It wasn't Saturday or 14th Nisan. There just isn't that much evidence for Orthodox Christians holding to a Saturday Sabbath. But there's lots of evidence for Christians long before the Council of Nicaea holding to a Sunday Sabbath, and no evidence at the Council of Nicaea that there was a prevailing Saturday Sabbatarian practice that was high-handedly changed by a church council.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast